If you or someone you know is struggling with back pain or herniated discs, I can almost guarantee you this story is going to help you. This is my story of how I overcame it and the very specific things that helped it as well as didn't help it. I would consider this one of the toughest battles of my life. Let's rewind to how this all started. I've had 2 episodes of back pain. My first episode of back pain seems like a very common story with people that kind of go on this trajectory of getting a herniated disc. My first episode was a very acute battle with back pain. This happened after I was doing jiu-jitsu. I was rolling with my coach that day. He's a bigger guy, great guy, by the way, and very talented at jiu-jitsu, so it's no fault to him. But we were rolling around, and I think he did a knee on belly to me. I didn't feel it at that time, but the next day when I woke up, I could barely move. I was hunched over. I could barely get to the bathroom. I was very scared, had to cancel the cross train that we had planned. Eventually, what really remedied this was doing some yoga with Adrian sessions. That's what I remember. And a lot of it was focused on my piriformis. Now, when I would go for long car rides after that for the next couple of years, I would be cognizant of this, and I would get kind of some pain in that back left hip. But it generally really went away with about 2 weeks. And again, this seems to be a story that I hear quite often, a very acute battle with this back pain. So I thought that I was totally out of the blue with back pain, never had to really worry about it. However, a second episode came in June of 2024. Let's kind of give you a little bit of background on what was going on with my life. So a few things were going on with my life at this time. And number one, I was doing a lot of driving, which means a lot of sitting. We had been doing trips to Moab. I'd been doing trips to the Grand Canyon. I'd been going to Pueblo, Colorado to do a new contract. And all of this was in the span of 2 to 3 months. It was the most driving that I really have ever done in my life. And so obviously I was doing a lot of sitting. What I remember about this time specifically was the fact that I went down to do a very ambitious splitboarding trip. So splitboarding is where you take apart your snowboard, you put it into 2 planks that look like skis, and then you skin up the mountain and then you snowboard down. So I went to do what was called Mount Elbert and the Decalibron. So Mount Elbert is the highest peak in Colorado, and then the Decalibron is 4 peaks in Colorado, all that you can hit all in one. And I wanted to do this over basically 2 days. Well, what had happened was the week before I even tried to do this, I was down in Pueblo, Colorado, and that was about a 4-hour drive one way. So I did this drive and I came back, and this is also something that I think really contributed to what I will be talking about later, but I was extremely stressed. I was extremely stressed because I started this new contract with my buddy's company, which is a fantastic company. The most stressed I've been definitely since I quit my full-time job. And well, when I got back home, I wanted to go back out kind of towards that direction in Colorado and do this splitboarding tour. So I go down there, I make this giant trip, which is about 4 hours one way, similar to Pueblo. I get to the base of the Decalibron, and the next day I wake up and it's a total whiteout blizzard. I mean, it would be so foolish to go there and try to summit these peaks in this type of conditions. And so I bailed. I got back in my car and I drove right back to my home in Wyoming. And so that was 4 hours right there, another 4 hours back. Okay, well, a few days go by again, and for that next weekend, I go back out, weather changes, I go back out, and I go do these objectives. Now, this is right at the tail end of getting back from a Grand Canyon trip, which was, again, probably 12 hours one way or something like that, where I did a 40-mile run in the Grand Canyon there and back, or to the north side, and back to the north and south side and back. So now I go back out and I do that same trip just a few days later again. So 4 hours one way. I go and I wake up at 2:30. I summit Mount Albert. I come back down, I sit right back in my car, I drive to the other place, I chill there for a little bit, I wake up at 2:30 a.m. again, do 4 14ers, snowboard back down. Now, as I'm on my drive back and I get out of the car, this was my first sign of issues with my back. Now, this was June. Now, in April, I had got a new car, a new RAV4. And I remember thinking right away that there was no lumbar support on this chair. And it felt totally different than the seat that I had before. And I remember thinking that. And a part of me wonders if all of that driving in that new car from April to June started to contribute to a lot of this back pain because I did not have this proper lumbar support. So it's one thing to think about. Now, June was the first indication that I got of this, but it was nothing significant. Like, I was getting some back pain, but it wasn't anything that was debilitating to me, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So all through summer, it was fine. And as I started to get into October is when the symptoms started to increase. So I think during the summer, they started to increase and increase and increase, but it was very imperceptible. Once October hit, though, the symptoms were starting to come to a climax. Now, mind you, I had done an 18-hour drive one way to do the Wonderland Trail in Washington. I did 18 hours back. That was the summer. I was doing more driving, so I was adding into all of this. I was putting myself into a back debt is what I was doing. Now, the climax of my symptoms came in the end of October into November and December. And what had happened was I had met it was the same buddies that I was doing the contract with, and I met them down in Pueblo, Colorado. And we did a workout together, which I was totally down for, but I didn't know what it was going to be until we did the workout. And we ended up doing this workout, and it molded down into a mile run. And in between the 13-mile run, we went to this park and we did a Murph workout, which was 1 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, and then 300 air squats. So in the middle of the mile run, we did that. And I remember the next morning getting up and I was in so much pain. I could barely bend over to touch my toes. And that's when the symptoms really started to kick up for me. Then into November, I was still doing jiu-jitsu at this time too. The thing about the jiu-jitsu here is it's great. However, a lot of the folks that you're doing jiu-jitsu with are college-age students, and I'm 33. So I'm going against these college-age students that have never been injured before, and they just go hard. And I remember getting taken down one time and it just falling on that right hip, which is where I was getting all of my pain, which kicked up symptoms even more. I then went to go teach jiu-jitsu in the middle of November. And with the second move that I was teaching people, I had to weave my leg in between the partner to show them. And I could not even get my leg in between their legs because I had to hunch my back. And the sharpest pain, like somebody driving a ice pick into your hip. And it was at that point where I thought, oh my God, like I need to really do something about this. So I ended up stopping jiu-jitsu and I started researching everything that I could about back pain and talking to people. Meanwhile, my back pain is getting worse and worse and worse. It was getting to the point where I would still be able to sleep during the whole night, but every time that I would wake up or every time that I would get out of bed for the first 2 hours, like I said, it was an ice pick that was just being driven into my hip every morning. And it started to spread down into my hamstrings. And then eventually it got to the point where if I would wake up to take a leak in the middle of the night, I would wake up at 2, 3 o'clock and it would be at the same time every night. I'd wake up and then I'd come back into bed and I couldn't get back to sleep because now the pain was infiltrating me when I was laying down because I had just woken up and walked. If I just stayed asleep, if I just stayed laying down, it wouldn't come. But as soon as I got up, it would be there. I was waking up at 2 o'clock and then I would not be able to sleep anymore. It was one of the worst experiences of my life. And it was getting worse and worse every single day. So like I said, I did a lot of research. And through this research, I was able to find the McGill method, the McKenzie method, and NUCA chiropractors. So what helped a lot for me from these methods was the McGill method, especially with the press-ups. The press-ups and things like that would get me out of acute pain, but it wasn't solving my issue fully. I would feel better for a few minutes to an hour or whatever, and then the pain would come back. The pain would still be there if I was taking a 5-minute ride to try and go work out. All of this stuff was starting to come to an head. So I eventually started to go to a NUCA chiropractor, which is a upper cervical chiropractor, essentially. I wasn't big onto the regular chiropractors at this time, but I had heard a lot of good things about NUCA chiropractors. And what they do is they adjust the cervical spine in your neck because their philosophy is that everything originates from the head. And if that balance is off, then everything else is going to be off. So he did a bunch of assessments on me. He did x-rays. And it was at that point where I saw that my hips were super out of line. Like my left hip was way higher than my right hip. And my left leg was obviously higher than my right leg. And he did x-rays on my neck. My neck was out of line. So he did a correction and I was super hopeful with it and nothing happened. I mean, it was the same as before. And I was it was at this time where I started to get pretty depressed because I was trying all these conventional methods that people had been talking about, right? The McGill method, the McKenzie method. I was doing the press ups. I was doing all this stuff. I was doing the core exercise. I had stopped working out because that's what my new chiropractor said. He said, hey, just stop working out. Maybe you're overloading all your stuff. He didn't think it was a herniation or anything like that, blah, 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 blah. So I'm trying all this stuff and it's getting worse and it's getting worse. And I wake up in the morning where I can't sleep again. And I send the new chiropractor an email and I say, hey, I can't continue going here anymore because one, it's an hour and 10 drive and I feel absolutely terrible when I sit that long. So I get there and nothing's really working for me. So like, I'm sorry, man, like you've been great, but I have to stop. So I stopped that. I'm still doing the McKenzie, McGill. I'm doing the core exercises and it gets to the day before my birthday. And it was another night where I didn't sleep and put the picture up right here. I take a picture in the mirror of what I look like. You can see the circles in my eyes and because I hadn't been sleeping and I called my parents and I just started sobbing. Because when you're in this situation, you feel so hopeless. Like you can't imagine your life without this pain. And you never feel like you're going to be normal again. And unfortunately, that was the pit of despair I was in. I didn't know what was wrong. People were telling me this. I think the hardest thing about this type of stuff, back pain, herniations, is that you have so many different sources telling you what to do that you have no idea who to trust. And so I call my parents and I'm just sobbing. I can barely talk. I mean, I felt like my life was over. Well, I have to go to another trip to Pueblo. So I had to go down to Pueblo. And so what I did was a buddy helped me. He was a director of PT. A buddy helped me and he said, hey, I think you need to get an MRI. Just go to this first look MRI out of Denver. You don't need a referral. And it's $99. I think it's going to be well worth it to see what's wrong. So on the way back from Pueblo, I go and I stop and I get an MRI. And the MRI results are literally in my hand as I drive back from Denver and get back into Laramie. So I'm on the treadmill at this point and I get the email and oh my God, number one, with this entire trip of sitting and driving, my back was just on absolute fire when I got back. And so I remember I'm on the treadmill and I pull up the email and it's got all the results and I'll put the results up here. Basically it was a herniation at L4 and then a huge herniation at L5S1, a 2 centimeter herniation. Now when I've looked at other people's MRI images before, they have like kind of little bumps coming out of their vertebrae and things like that. But this thing was totally into the canal. I shared the results with my PT buddy and he said, hey man, one of the things that really concerns me about this is how they talk about severe stenosis, which is why it's compressing the nerve so bad. So now my head's spinning and I think that like, oh my God, like I need to get surgery. Okay. So I call my insurance, which I'm on private insurance, and I figure out I'm going to have to pay $9,700 for surgery before they start picking up any of it, which is wild to me. So I try to find alternative methods. Now I was looking everywhere, guys. I mean, I was so desperate. I'm looking on Reddit. I'm looking at all these places, which I would stay away from Reddit because a lot of people that go there are really in a lot of pain and they're really going to make you feel hopeless. But a big shift happened for me around this time after I got my MRI because I ended up getting on the low back ability program from Brendan Backstrom. I had been seeing him on YouTube and I had been very curious about this low back ability program, and after hearing more about his story and how bad his herniations and how it was affecting all these areas in his life, I thought I would give it a try. And you determine what you want to pay for it. So I got on this, and one of the things that originally turned me off to the program was how he was doing a lot of flexion or bending his back. So in other words, he was on the back extension machine and doing a lot of these back extension holds and all this type of stuff. And I'm thinking, well, McGill tells me that I'm supposed to move like a robot for basically the rest of my life. I can never flex my back. And if I do, I'm going to be in pain. I'm going to be re-triggering the pain process and all this. That didn't make that much sense to me, guys. It really didn't make that much sense to me. Like, why would I avoid all this? Why are you graced with a back in the first place if you have to avoid all of these different movements? So as I learned more about Brendan's program, he was very much about that lost mobility and retraining your brain to not be fearful of it. And that made so much more sense for me. The other thing that I found was TMS, which is, I cannot even freaking remember. What does TMS stand for? TMS stands for tension myositis syndrome. Basically, it was coined by this doctor who said that back pain and herniations and stuff like that, like a lot of people will be living with herniations, but they don't necessarily have symptoms. So why is that? And he was a big proponent of Dr. Sarno. That's who it was. He's a big proponent of your emotional capacity and what you're experiencing emotionally has a very big impact on your symptoms. And if I looked back on a lot of what had been going on in 2024, I had a lot of stressors. I was still in a different city. I'm still working for myself. I had picked up that new contract, which, like I said, loved the company, but I was very stressed about that. I was doing a lot of traveling. And if I think about it, the TMS philosophy was that your pain will move, and it will move to where it gives you the most attention. And I remember at the start of 2024 and even at the end of 2023, I was getting these really bad stomach problems. Like it would be a 30-minute thing where I was just socked in the gut. Couldn't move. I mean, just could not move for 30 minutes. And I think that what happened was this TMS pain from these emotions that I was repressing was, and I know this is total woo-woo, but I do think a little bit of it, I think it started to travel to my back because I was giving that more attention. Okay. And finally, what he talks about is that your emotions it'll be like this for a little while, right? And sometimes your body can handle it until it doesn't need to. And I think when it didn't need to was in November, is when the symptoms kicked up, was when I was done hunting, I was done with all my mountain stuff, and all of a sudden, boom, these symptoms came. So that was interesting. The thing I don't agree with Sarno with this is that you should quit all your PT. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. It should not be a thing. There's another guy on YouTube that you should check out called Pain for You. He was really good about kind of translating a lot of the Dr. Sarno's work into a little more modern times. And then one of the last things was Wim Hof. So you guys probably all know Wim Hof as the Iceman. He's a big proponent of breathing and ice baths. And I've always been kind of curious about this stuff. And I've been doing cold showers for about 3 years, but I never got an ice bath and I would never do the breathing. And so I started to incorporate all 3 of these things into my life, as well as supplements. I was and I can leave this in the show notes, a turmeric ginger tea, which is really good for inflammation. I was really just big on trying to get this inflammation down. And I was taking a lot of those supplements. So what had happened was I've only been on the low back ability program for about a little bit over a month. And I can tell you right now that I am probably back to 80% of where I was. Whereas in December, where it's January 17th right now, in December at this time, or at early December and November, I was probably operating at about 10%. Like I was in so much pain. The low back ability program was awesome because not only did it focus on back strength and regaining mobility in your back, but also hip mobility. Because like I said before, my hips were off because sitting. And one thing too that I forgot to mention was when I was in Pueblo for that last trip, I had listened to a podcast, or I had been listening to some clips by David Goggins, because I remember reading his book. And I remember him saying that he was so tight, or that he had all these issues in his hips and stuff. And I lost his book. I don't know where it went. But I listened to all these clips, and I'm going to leave all this stuff in the links for you guys because it's going to help you. But he talked about being in so much pain, he couldn't get out of bed, couldn't go to work, couldn't do anything, couldn't run. So he just started stretching. And what was great about the low back ability program is that there's a few days a week where it's specifically stretching and gaining strength in those stretching positions. So that made a lot of sense to me. And what I can tell you is that really, I think the biggest things for me was getting on this low back ability program, regaining the mobility in my low back, because I hadn't been using my low back because McGill was telling me I can't use my low back ever. So I lost all my mobility there. And if you don't use a muscle, it's just going to wither away. And I remember my PT buddy was needling me and he said, dude, like your right side, your extenders, they're way smaller than your left side. And it's because of all these spasms. So that combined with Wim Hof and the ice bath, I ice bath every single morning now I'm getting up to 2 minutes and 15 seconds. And it's really cold here in Wyoming, guys. And right there. I used to sneeze and I would get this sharp pain, bam, right there. I'm good now. I'm strengthening my back. And so the Wim Hof method with the ice bath and the breathing, guys, these things are a godsend. As we keep going here, I'm going to share a few other things that really helped me with this, and then some other things that really didn't help me, and then how I'm going to go forward with this. So I have my own actual sheet I was taking stock of everything that I was doing, okay, guys? Every single thing that I was doing and putting in my body, I was seeing if it was making it worse or better, okay? So let's go over some things that were making it better for me. So number one was heat. I loved having heat, and I'll leave a link for the infrared body warmer or heat pad that I ordered. And I have this, and I do this every single night now, and I still do it. It's great. Infrared gets into your skin better, and it promotes more circulation. So I put it right on my herniated disc where it's at every single night for at least an hour. And I think that is contributing to a lot of my recovery as well. Nerve flossing is great. What nerve flossing is I'll show it on the video here. You're going like this. Let's see if I can see. So you can see my leg. I'm going up with my leg, back with my head. Down with my leg, down with my head. Up with my leg, back with my head. What you're doing is you're creating the canal. You're flossing your sciatica canal. And as it's going back and forth there, it's sliding through that canal and then, I guess, destimulating that nerve. That works really, really well. The other few things that worked super well for me, Tiger Balm worked. I no longer need to use that. Aleve worked really well. These were things where it was so acute that I couldn't function without them. These things, I think, worked really, really good. Some other things were increasing my vitamin D intake because I had heard from Dr. Berg that people's pain perceptions become worse in the winter because they're not getting this vitamin D, which is supposed to be a supplement that you need for pain, I guess. I don't know. I started taking more vitamin D, and I mean, I had been taking it for about a month before it started working. Again, I don't know if it's one exact thing that's doing this, but I think it's a synergistic thing, okay? Let's see what else helped. Oh yeah, well, let's go to the things that didn't really help. So the Nuka didn't help for me. The McGill method, McKenzie method didn't really help for me. Now, some things of theirs did help for me to get out of acute pain, but I was only treating the symptoms. I was not treating the root cause in the low back ability program. I highly recommend you guys get on this. Please get on it. Oh, another one thing that worked for me too was I've stopped eating gluten as much. I still eat a little bit, and I stopped drinking milk. So one thing that I noticed about myself I started in 2024, started drinking a lot more milk, which kind of coincided with the time that all these symptoms originated. So I don't know, again, I can't form conclusions on this, but cutting out milk for me, and I haven't put it back in, I think has been pretty good, which sucks because milk is freaking awesome, guys. Gosh dang it. I wish it would be fine. All right, so what I have learned, guys, number one, never waste a good crisis. I know if you're in the throes of this especially, this feels like you're never going to beat it. You are never going to get out of it. And I'm telling you guys, you can beat this. It kind of pains me to say this. I had some thoughts in my head that were not good, okay? I think we all know what we're talking about with this, okay? You can't go there. You guys are going to beat this. The really cool thing about herniations is that they can spontaneously resolve. So again, most people are walking around with herniations and you never know it because they're asymptomatic. You guys can get there. But I know that it feels like you're never going to beat it, but you have to keep a journal or a log of things that you're trying, and you have to try it for at least a month to see if it works. You can't take a turmeric pill today and think that you're going to be great tomorrow. It's consistency, because we are all in a back debt. We are in a hip mobility debt, all of this stuff. And you need to start making investments into that account to get out of that. Eventually, you don't need to do all of the stuff that you're doing, but you need to dig yourself out of that hole right now. One thing that resonated with me from David Goggins was the fact that he had visited a doctor. His doctor said, dude, you are the tightest individual I've ever seen. You need like 15,000 hours of stretching to be normal again. And he's like, screw that. That's when he wasn't getting the symptoms. But once he got the symptoms, he realized, oh, I was digging myself a hole. So this is the same for me. I would do a little mobility every morning. I would do one stretching day a week, but that is not enough, guys, especially if you're doing high-level mountain things. You have to give yourself a maintenance period. I like to think of myself as a car. I'm really, really good at driving the car, which means exercising. I'm really good at feeding myself healthy, which is the fuel. But I am terrible at maintenance. I'm terrible at the oil changes, the tire rotations, the steering wheel alignment. And how far is your car going to get if you're not doing any of that? You have to think of your body as that. So give yourself a maintenance period. My maintenance period is going to be the winters, and then also dedicating 2 to 3 days a week of that in the summer. I mean, this is something that is going to pay dividends for you guys. Goggins said that he started running faster when he started opening his hips. So be aware of that. The other thing, because I like to think about and this is what I asked folks about this too, that have been going through back pain, like what were the good things that came out of this? Because when you're in that deep, dark hole, you don't feel like any good things are going to happen. But it was helpful for me to hear good things that people experience because of this. And for me, it was realizing I need to do a maintenance period. And it's realizing that I wouldn't have done a lot of this stuff if it wasn't because of my herniation. And that gives me the chills. I wouldn't have done these extra healthy things like ice baths that I now love, that I do every single morning. I would not know that I was not properly training my back in the gym after watching this low back ability program. I wouldn't have known that my hips were so out of line and that I needed way more mobility than I was leaving myself, that I was basically kidding myself of not doing enough of. And I probably wouldn't have started to cut gluten or cut milk. Or like today, I'm doing a 24-hour fast, which is probably nothing to a lot of these people that do 3 days. But right now I'm on hour, I don't know, 20 or 18 right now. And I'm experimenting with my body right now. And if it wasn't for this herniation, I would have never gone down these roads. I would have kept kicking the can on maintenance. I would have kept kicking the can on my lower back. I would have not done breathing techniques. I would have not realized how my emotions are dictating some of the symptoms of my life. I would have never done a prolonged fast like this. If you guys are in that deep, dark hole, I've been there, okay? It was an ice pick into my hip every single morning. I couldn't start my day for 2 hours. I would have to start it with a 30 or a 25-minute walk with the dog, and I could barely walk. I mean, it started to spread down into my hamstrings. It started to spread into my toes at some point. I literally thought my life was over. And I'm telling you guys, don't go down that route. Think about all these things that I talked about today. Consider them, putting them into your program. Keep a journal of what is working, what is not working. This is a full-on assault to getting yourself better. You can get there, but it's going to take some time. And it's going to take time because you are in a debt right now. The reason this occurred was if it was outside of a car crash or some traumatic event is because you accumulated a debt. So it's going to take time to undo that debt and pay that debt back. So think about that instead of becoming frustrated. If this helped you, please leave a like on this and please share it with somebody that this might help as well. Thanks, guys. Leave 5 stars on Spotify. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. But yeah, at the very least, just give this a like. Thanks, guys.